Welcome to today's deep dive. I am your host, and I'm really excited to get into our topic today.
Thanks for having me. I've got the notes ready, so let's just dive right in.
Awesome. So picture this for a second. You are a young person, maybe 19 or 20 years old,
Okay.
and you're living in a small rural community somewhere in South Africa. You're sitting outside or just scrolling through TikTok on your phone, right?
Yeah, seeing everyone else's life.
Exactly. You're looking at all these people living these fast-paced, vibrant lives in major global cities, and you are dreaming of just getting a decent job.
Right, like anyone would.
Right. You want a future. Maybe you want to start your own business. But you look up from your screen, you look around your immediate environment, and, well, it is quiet.
It's just dirt roads in the bush.
Yeah, the bush, the big city with all its promises and skyscrapers and corporate ladders, it feels like a million miles away. Geographically, sure, but, mostly economically.
Which is, it's a feeling shared by rural youth all over the globe, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
the traditional narrative we've built over the last century is that if you want a future, you have to pack your bags and head to where the concrete is.
Yeah, you have to leave.
Right. You have to leave the rural landscape behind because the rural landscape is viewed as, well, economically stagnant.
But what if I told you that the dirt under that young person's feet, that quiet bush, is actually part of a highly active 4 billion rand economic engine?
That's pretty incredible to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today, we are looking at a fascinating piece of writing called Wild Horizons, Building Futures Through South African Conservation. And honestly, we are going to completely reframe how you view conservation.
Because it's not just the standard narrative anymore.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. We need to get past this idea of conservation being just about, saving majestic elephants and taking photos of gorgeous glowing sunsets.
Right.
We are looking at how South Africa's wild spaces are operating as massive financial pumps, specifically designed to empower local youth.
And that is a massive paradigm shift. What the authors of Wild Horizons are doing is taking the concept of environmental protection and synthesizing it with raw, undeniable economics.
Putting dollars, or rand, rather, behind the trees.
Exactly. The data in this source proves something quite radical. Nature preservation and community wealth building are not two separate parallel initiatives.
Right.
They are, in fact, the exact same project.
Wait, I have to stop you right there and push back on that premise just a bit.
Yeah.
Because historically, those two things have been completely at odds.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Usually, human economic expansion just destroys nature. We cut down the forest to build the factory. We pave over the wetlands to build the housing development.
Yeah, that's the classic model.
So how are they forcing environmental preservation and economic expansion to perfectly align here?
That is the fundamental tension, isn't it? I mean, the traditional model of wealth generation relies on extracting resources. Logging, mining, intensive agriculture.
Taking things out of the ground.
Right. You deplete the natural capital to create financial capital. But what South African conservation models are doing, and what this source breaks down so well, is shifting from an extractive economy to an experiential one.
Okay, an experiential one.
Yeah. The natural capital is the financial capital, but only if it remains intact.
Okay, so let's look at the sheer scale of this, because to understand how these parks are building local futures, you really have to grasp the mind-boggling financials.
The numbers are huge.
They are. We have to move away from the romanticized cinematic idea of a safari and just look at the hard numbers. The source outlines that South Africa has 21 national parks managed by SANParks.
21, yeah.
And we are talking about massive, sprawling tracts of wild land. Places you might know, like Kruger National Park, Addo Elephant Park, Table Mountain, Marikele, Algarbies Falls.
All the big hitters.
Plus, major game reserves like Pilanesberg operate on a very similar model. Last year alone, these spaces saw over 6 million visitors.
6 million.
6 million. And they brought in more than 4 billion rand in total revenue.
4 billion rand. And, that number is crucial because it forces us to stop thinking of these parks as passive protected zones.
Right. They aren't just museums.
Exactly. They aren't just pretty spots for tourists where we put up a fence and hope people come take a look.
When I was reading this, the analogy that immediately clicked for me was Silicon Valley.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, think about a massive tech hub in California. You've got billions of dollars flowing through it, generating thousands of jobs, creating this incredible gravitational pull for talent.
Right.
But in tech, the core asset is software code. And the beauty of code is that it scales infinitely. You can sell the same software to 1 million people without depleting the original code.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Here, instead of servers and software, the core assets are savannas, mountains, and wildlife. The environment is the intellectual property.
That's a great way to put it.
And just like software, it scales. A herd of elephants can be viewed by 10 people or 10,000 people. As long as you manage the impact of the humans, the asset isn't depleted by being looked at.
Right, the environment is the engine.
But there is a number in the text that caught my eye, and I want to look at the mechanics of it. The source states that the total revenue is over 4 billion rand, but it explicitly notes that tourism alone accounts for about 2.8 billion of that.
Yes, the tourism chunk.
So if tourism brings in 2.8 billion, where does the rest of the 4 billion rand come from? That is a massive chunk of change not accounted for by people just buying safari tickets.
It's a massive gap. And while the excerpt we're looking at doesn't provide a, line-by-line itemized receipt for that remaining 1.2 billion, what's fascinating here is the existence of that gap actually proves the central point of the source.
Okay, how so?
Well, these spaces are highly active financial pumps. The revenue isn't just ticket sales and lodge bookings. We have to think about the vast, complex network of operations required to run a biome of that size.
What does that actually look like on the ground, though? Like, practically speaking?
Well, think about filming rights. If a major documentary crew, say from the BBC or National Geographic, wants to spend 6 months filming leopards in Kruger, they are paying massive location fees.
Oh, wow, of course.
Right? But beyond the fees, they need local fixers, they need specialized vehicles, secure storage for gear, and localized knowledge. That creates a whole microeconomy.
So it's not just the park getting paid, it's everyone around it.
Exactly. Then you have research grants. Universities and global ecological institutes pay for access to these living laboratories.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah. And you have sustainable resource management, complex public-private partnerships for running restaurants within the parks, and international conservation funding.
So the footprint is huge.
It shows that the economic footprint of a national park extends incredibly far beyond just a tourist in a Jeep holding a camera. These parks act as vital infrastructure for the entire region.
Infrastructure, man, that completely changes the framing. It's not a museum you visit, it's a utility that powers the region. But if these parks are truly acting as regional infrastructure, that scale of revenue must be causing intense economic friction. I mean, you can't just drop 4 billion rand into a rural area without seeing massive socioeconomic shift.
No, you definitely can't.
So who is actually capturing that value? Does this money actually reach the people living on the dusty roads bordering the parks? Or does it just, pool at the top with international tour operators?
The authors are very deliberate in answering this. The cash does not just sit in a corporate account in Pretoria. It is actively converted into localized livelihoods.
Right.
And we aren't just talking about a handful of token jobs either.
No, the text lists a massive spectrum. We're talking rangers, guides, cleaners, cooks, drivers, people running the lodges, people managing the curio shops.
All essential roles.
But the part that really demands attention here is the mention of Sandpark's expanded public works program.
Yes, the EPWP.
The source notes this program alone created thousands of jobs. Let's actually pause and define what this is, because it's not just your standard hiring fair.
No, it's a very specific strategy.
Right. The Expanded Public Works Program is essentially a public sector initiative, often funded in partnership with the government, and it's specifically designed to create labor-intensive work for poverty relief.
Right. Labor-intensive being the key phrase there.
Exactly. So instead of bringing in one massive, expensive machine to clear alien vegetation from a park road, they deliberately structure the project to employ 50 local people to do it manually.
Yeah, it prioritizes human headcount and wage injection over pure mechanized efficiency.
It is a targeted economic intervention.
Absolutely.
And the statistic in the source that completely blew my mind is that over 60% of these jobs went to the youth. 60%.
It's a staggering number.
And not just any youth, but locals living right on the borders of the parks. But why youth specifically? Why is that demographic detail so heavily emphasized in the text?
Because, well, we connect this to the bigger picture. What we are witnessing is a deliberate attempt to halt the rural brain drain.
Which goes right back to the young person scrolling TikTok at the very beginning of our deep dive.
Precisely. I mean, in developing and developed nations alike, rural areas are hollowed out. The youngest, brightest, and most physically capable individuals are forced to leave to find work.
Because there's nothing else for them to do.
Right, and the local economy stagnates because the talent pool vanishes. And let's think about the psychological weight of that choice.
It's got to be heavy.
Moving from a close-knit rural village to a sprawling urban center like Johannesburg or Cape Town with no guarantees, a high cost of living, and brutal competition. It is a terrifying high-risk gamble.
Yeah, it's massive trauma, often separating families for months or even years at a time.
But by offering immediate localized training and employment, these national parks are giving that young person a viable alternative.
A reason to stay.
Exactly. The mechanics of this are life-changing. Instead of leaving, that young man or woman stays. They enter a training pipeline. They might start in the public works program, then train as a field guide. They learn the highly specialized, highly valued skill of animal tracking.
Wow.
And suddenly they're taking international tourists on game drives, acting as the ultimate authority on their local landscape.
It's like having a world-class university and a booming job market suddenly dropped right into your own backyard.
That's exactly what it is.
You don't have to leave your culture and your family to find your future. Your home is the foundation of your future. And from a community standpoint, retaining those smart, ambitious 20-somethings changes a town's trajectory for the next 50 years. You are literally building local leadership.
It's community preservation through economic opportunity.
But the source pushes this concept even further because direct employment, getting a paycheck from sandparks as a tracker or a cook, is really only phase one of a healthy economy.
Right.
A truly sustainable economic engine can't just employ people directly. It has to spawn secondary industries. It has to create a ripple effect.
Because if everyone works for the exact same employer, that's just a company town.
Which is inherently fragile.
Very fragile. We have to look at the independent community businesses that spring up around the park.
This is where we look at the friction of moving 6 million people. Think about the logistics, right?
Right.
6 million visitors need to eat, they need a place to sleep, they need to buy souvenirs, their rental cars get flat tires. Every single point of friction in moving those bodies through space is a business opportunity for the locals.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The friction creates the spark.
Exactly.
And the source highlights this perfectly. There's an example of a young woman who starts a small catering business. She isn't on the park's payroll.
Right.
She identified a point of friction. Lodges need consistent, high-quality local food, and she built a business supplying them. Or artisans making and selling crafts from sustainable materials directly to the tourists.
Taking advantage of that flow of people.
Exactly. The parks are actively supporting these secondary businesses through training programs and skills workshops.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It reminds me of the concept of an anchor tenant in a giant shopping mall.
Okay, an anchor tenant. I like that.
If you look at the architecture of a massive mall, they always have one giant department store at the far end, right? The anchor tenant.
Yeah, the one, the huge parking lot.
Right. That store doesn't make its money from the smaller shops. It makes its money because it's a massive draw. It brings in the heavy foot traffic.
A destination.
Exactly. But because thousands of people are walking through the mall doors just to get to that department store, all the smaller independent boutiques, the food court vendors, the kiosk owners, they all have a captive audience.
They thrive off the gravity of the anchor tenant.
The national park is the anchor tenant.
Yes, that is exactly what it is.
The park brings the 6 million visitors. And that captive foot traffic allows this entire ecosystem of local independent entrepreneurship to absolutely flourish.
It creates a whole biome of commerce.
The source specifically highlights Plainsburg as a model for this. The sheer gravity of its tourism creates steady employment for the entire surrounding area, far beyond the physical borders of the park itself.
The anchor tenant analogy works perfectly because it highlights interdependence.
How so?
Well, the smaller businesses need the park to bring the visitors, obviously, but the park also relies on the smaller businesses.
Right, without the food and the crafts, it's just looking at trees.
Exactly. Without the local caterers, the cultural guides, the artisans, the park experience is sterile. It needs the surrounding community to provide a vibrant, complete ecosystem for the visitor.
I completely agree with that interdependence, but as I was reading this section of the source, there was one specific mechanism that kind of stopped me in my tracks.
Which part?
It talks about parks giving communities a share of the wealth through skills workshops, which logically fits our business model perfectly. But then it mentions wildlife donations.
Yes, the wildlife donation.
I read that and thought, wait, what? How exactly do wildlife donations fit into a business ecosystem? That just sounds like charity. Are they literally just handing over lions and rhinos to people?
I know it sounds counterintuitive at first, but this raises an important question about how we define the boundaries of conservation.
Okay, boundaries.
Yeah. Historically, a national park was a walled garden. The model was basically put up a high fence, keep the pristine animals inside, keep the local impoverished people strictly outside, and deploy armed guards to maintain that separation.
Which immediately creates a totally adversarial relationship.
Completely.
The locals look at the park and say, you care more about the animals than you do about our survival.
Exactly. It was a fundamentally flawed colonial model of conservation. Wildlife donations represent the logistical breakdown of that wall. It is about asset transfer.
Okay, asset transfer. Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Let's break it down. Sometimes this takes the form of sustainable culling. An ecosystem has a carrying capacity, right? If an elephant population grows too large for the fenced area, they will literally eat the forest to the ground, destroying the habitat for every other species. So ecologists determine a certain number must be culled to save the biome.
Which is grim, but, ecologically necessary.
Right. But rather than wasting that resource, the park processes that game meat and donates it to the immediate border communities, ensuring food security.
Wow.
So the byproduct of conservation directly sustains human life. But the more radical form of wildlife donations is the actual transfer of live, high-value assets.
Wait, really? So they're handing over the animals. How does a community even manage that?
Well, it's a joint venture. The park might donate a breeding herd of antelopes or even high-profile game to a community-owned stretch of land.
But they don't just drop the animals off and leave, do they?
No. It comes with veterinary support, land management training, and business development. The community establishes their own ecotourism venture on their own land.
Okay, I see. So they are transferring the capital, the literal biological capital, to help the community start a complementary business.
Yes, and the psychological shift here is the most important part. Through these donations, the community transitions from being outside the fence looking in to being vested shareholders in the wildlife economy.
Shareholder is such a great word for it.
It changes everything. When a community owns a piece of the wildlife, when that herd of animals is the direct source of their children's school fees and their town's infrastructure, they become the fiercest protectors of that wildlife.
Because poaching is no longer just a crime against the state, it's a crime against their own bank account.
Precisely.
If someone tries to poach an animal, they are literally stealing from the community's future. The alignment is complete. Economics and conservation become the exact same project.
Exactly. The community isn't just serving the park. They are actively partnering with it.
So what does this all mean? If we pull back from the specific examples of South Africa, what does this mean for you listening right now?
That's the real question.
The core takeaway from Wild Horizons is that protecting our natural heritage is quite literally how we build futures at home. And the source actually has a call to action, and it's something I really want to relay here.
Go for it.
It says that if you are in school right now, or if you are hustling and looking for your path in life, you need to seriously look at the intersection of tourism, conservation, and business management.
It's a huge growth sector.
It really is. This industry is not just about biology. It is hungry for logistical planners, financial experts, tech developers, and entrepreneurs. Our wild places are actively creating real livelihoods. One job, one story, one visitor at a time.
And we can generalize that principle even further, honestly.
Yeah.
Whether you are listening to this in a dense urban center like Chicago, a historic city in Europe, or a coastal town anywhere in the world, the lesson from South Africa applies to you.
How so?
You need to look at your own local environment and identify the unproductive assets.
The things people just walk past every single day.
Exactly. Ask yourself, how can my community's natural geography or even our cultural history be transformed into a sustainable economic engine?
Right.
How do we shift from simply existing in a space or viewing it as a passive backdrop to actively building an ecosystem around it? The blueprint provided by Sandparks shows that with the right integration, any local asset can become an anchor tenant.
It is entirely about recognizing the hidden engines around us. But as I was reading this and thinking about the logistics of those 6 million visitors moving through those gates every year, a thought occurred to me.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's a vulnerability I want to leave you, the listener, to mull over today.
The vulnerability of the model itself.
Yes. Because we have just established that this incredibly successful, life-changing model of local youth empowerment is entirely anchored to physical foot traffic.
Right. It requires bodies in the park.
It relies on millions of human bodies getting on airplanes, renting cars, and physically moving through that specific geographic space.
Because physical presence is the catalyst that creates the friction, which, as we said, creates the economy.
Right. So my question is, what happens to the futures of these young field guides, the local caterers, the sustainable craft makers, if global travel trends drastically shift again?
Ah, I see.
We already know how fragile global travel can be due to pandemics or economic downturns. But let's look 20 years down the line.
Okay.
What happens when the next generation decides they favor hyper-realistic, fully immersive, virtual reality safaris from their living rooms?
That's a scary thought for the physical economy.
Right. What if the carbon footprint of international travel becomes socially or legally prohibitive?
If the intellectual property, the
Mhm.
visual of the lion, the sound of the bush, can be perfectly digitized and experienced remotely.
Exactly. If this brilliant economic engine is built entirely on the friction of physical tourism, how resilient is it in a digital future?
That is a very tough question.
It makes you wonder. The next time you are sitting there, scrolling through your phone, looking at a digital representation of the wild, you have to ask yourself, is the screen in your hand the very thing that will eventually threaten the real futures being built out in the bush? Something to think about.